The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before her ornate mirror, adjusting her navy blue dress. Today was different from any other royal engagement she had attended. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, written on cream-colored paper with the official seal of the White House. President Donald Trump was making a state visit to the United Kingdom, and among the various ceremonial events planned, there was something unusual mentioned in the private correspondence between the royal household and the American delegation. Catherine had always been known for her grace under pressure, but this morning, she felt a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. The protocol officers had briefed her extensively about what to expect during the president's visit, but they had been deliberately vague about one particular ceremony that would take place in the palace gardens. All she knew was that it involved a presentation of some kind, and that both King Charles and Queen Camilla would be present as witnesses. As she made her way down the marble corridors toward the morning room where she was to meet with the king's private secretary, Catherine reflected on how much her life had changed since joining the royal family. Every public appearance was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed, and every outfit choice discussed in newspapers around the world. Yet somehow she had learned to navigate this goldfish bowl existence with dignity and purpose. The private secretary, Sir Edward Pemberton, was waiting for her with a concerned expression on his weathered face. He had served the royal household for over 30 years and had seen many unusual requests come through the palace doors, but this one had left even him puzzled. "Your Royal Highness," he began, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles, "I wanted to speak with you privately about this afternoon's ceremony before the American delegation arrives." Catherine settled into the velvet armchair across from his desk, smoothing her skirt as she did so. "I've been wondering about the details myself, Sir Edward." The briefing papers were rather minimal. The elderly man cleared his throat and shuffled through a stack of documents on his desk. "Yes, well, that's because this is quite unprecedented. President Trump has requested permission to present you with what he calls a symbol of respect and admiration from the American people. Our intelligence suggests it's some form of decorative bow or ribbon, though we're not entirely certain of its significance or origin." Catherine raised an eyebrow. Throughout her years as a royal, she had received countless gifts from world leaders and dignitaries. Everything from hand-carved sculptures to rare books to precious jewelry had been presented to her during state visits and official functions. But the secrecy surrounding this particular gift was unusual, and the fact that it required the king's explicit approval made it even more intriguing. "Has His Majesty expressed any concerns about accepting this gift?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about her father-in-law's perspective on the matter. Sir Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The king has been, shall we say, cautiously optimistic about the gesture. He believes it's important to maintain strong diplomatic relations with our American allies, regardless of any personal reservations about their current leadership. However, he's also mindful of the fact that any gift accepted by a member of the royal family becomes part of the public record and will undoubtedly be scrutinized by the media." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. A junior secretary entered and whispered something in Sir Edward's ear that made his eyebrows rise considerably. After the young man left, the private secretary turned back to Catherine with a mixture of surprise and amusement on his face. "It appears, Your Royal Highness, that Queen Camilla has expressed a particular interest in observing this afternoon's ceremony. She's rearranged her schedule to ensure she can be present in the gardens when the presentation takes place." Catherine couldn't help but smile at this news. Camilla had always been supportive and welcoming since Catherine's marriage to William, offering sage advice about navigating the complexities of royal life. If the Queen Consort was making a special effort to attend this ceremony, it suggested that whatever was about to unfold was more significant than anyone had initially realized. As the morning progressed, Catherine found herself increasingly curious about the mysterious gift and the ceremony surrounding it. She spent time in her private office reviewing briefing materials about President Trump's visit, looking for any clues about what might be presented to her. The official itinerary listed the event simply as private garden ceremony gift presentation, with no additional details provided. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, arrived at lunchtime with updates from the protocol office. The American delegation had confirmed their arrival time, and security arrangements were being finalized for the garden ceremony. The president's staff has been quite insistent about the timing, Sarah reported. They want the presentation to take place at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the light in the rose garden will be optimal for photographs. This detail struck Catherine as particularly interesting. If photographs were being planned, it suggested that whatever was happening would likely become public knowledge very quickly. She made a mental note to ensure her appearance was absolutely perfect for what was clearly going to be a documented historical moment. The lunch hour passed slowly as Catherine tried to focus on her correspondence and daily duties, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming ceremony. She had met President Trump briefly during his previous visits to the UK, and while their interactions had been cordial, she had always found him to be somewhat unpredictable in his gestures and statements. The fact that he had specifically requested to present her with a gift, rather than offering it to the King or Queen Camilla, added another layer of mystery to the situation. As 2 o'clock approached, Catherine began her final preparations for the ceremony. Her dresser helped her change into a more formal outfit suitable for photographs, and her hair was touched up to ensure it would look perfect in any images that might be released to the media. She chose a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to Princess Diana, knowing that such details would not go unnoticed by royal watchers and photographers. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Catherine made her way toward the rose garden, where history was about to unfold in ways she could never have imagined. The rose garden at Buckingham Palace had been transformed for the occasion. White silk ribbons fluttered gently from the ancient oak trees, and a small platform had been erected near the fountain where the ceremony would take place. Catherine could see the American security detail positioned discreetly around the perimeter, their earpieces glinting in the afternoon sunlight as they maintained constant communication with their colleagues inside the palace. King Charles arrived first, walking with the measured pace that had become his signature since ascending to the throne. He wore his favorite gray suit with a burgundy tie, and Catherine noticed that he seemed more relaxed than usual. Perhaps the prospect of a successful diplomatic gesture was putting him at ease, or maybe he was simply looking forward to whatever surprise awaited them all. "Catherine, my dear," the king said warmly as he approached her near the entrance to the garden, "I must confess I'm quite curious about what our American friends have planned for us today. Sir Edward tells me that even their embassy staff seem unusually excited about this presentation." Before Catherine could respond, the sound of heels clicking on the stone pathway announced the arrival of Queen Camilla. She was dressed elegantly in a cream-colored dress with a matching jacket, and her signature pearl necklace caught the light as she moved. What struck Catherine immediately was the expression of barely contained amusement on Camilla's face, as if she knew something that the others didn't. "Has anyone managed to solve the mystery yet?" Camilla asked with a mischievous twinkle in her eye as she joined them. "I had tea with the American ambassador's wife yesterday, and she could barely contain her excitement about today's ceremony. She kept saying that it was going to be absolutely unprecedented and truly memorable." The three royals stood together in comfortable conversation for several minutes, speculating quietly about what was to come. Catherine found herself grateful for their presence, knowing that whatever happened next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The support of her royal family had been crucial throughout her years of public service, and today felt no different. At precisely 3 o'clock, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of the American delegation. President Trump appeared first, flanked by his security detail and followed by several members of his staff. He was dressed in his characteristic navy blue suit with a red tie, and Catherine noticed that he was carrying an ornate wooden box that seemed to be quite heavy, based on how carefully he was handling it. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness," President Trump said formally as he approached, offering appropriate bows and curtsies to each member of the royal family. Despite his sometimes controversial public persona, Catherine had to admit that he was observing proper protocol perfectly on this occasion. "Mr. President," King Charles responded with equal formality, "we're honored to welcome you to our home once again. I understand you have something special planned for us today." Trump's face broke into a broad smile, and Catherine could see that he was genuinely excited about whatever was in the wooden box. "Your Majesty, this is indeed a very special moment. What I'm about to present to Princess Catherine represents not just the admiration of the American people, but also a bridge between our two great nations. The president's staff had arranged themselves in a semicircle behind him, and Catherine noticed that several of them were holding cameras and recording devices. Whatever was about to happen was clearly being documented extensively for posterity. She glanced at King Charles, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Princess Catherine," President Trump continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "throughout your years of service to the British people and your work with charitable organizations around the world, you have shown grace, compassion, and dedication that transcends national boundaries. The American people have watched your journey with admiration and respect." Catherine felt herself blushing slightly at the unexpected praise. While she was accustomed to formal speeches during state visits, there was something different about the president's tone that suggested this was more personal than usual diplomatic rhetoric. Trump carefully placed the wooden box on a small table that had been positioned near the fountain. The box itself was beautiful, made of what appeared to be cherry wood with intricate brass hinges and clasps. As he began to open it, Catherine found herself holding her breath along with everyone else present. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of deep blue velvet, was the most extraordinary bow Catherine had ever seen. It wasn't simply decorative, it was clearly a work of art. The bow appeared to be made of silk in a stunning shade of midnight blue, with threads of gold and silver woven throughout in an intricate pattern that seemed to tell a story of its own. "This bow," President Trump explained as he carefully lifted it from the box, "was created by American artisans specifically for you, Princess Catherine. The silk comes from farms in Virginia, the gold thread was spun in California, and the design was inspired by the friendship between our nations that has endured through centuries of shared history." Catherine stepped forward to examine the bow more closely, and she was amazed by the level of craftsmanship involved. Tiny pearls had been sewn into the fabric at regular intervals, and she could see that the gold and silver threads formed a subtle pattern of roses and stars, symbols representing both Britain and America. "The roses represent your homeland," Trump continued, "while the stars symbolize the hopes and dreams that our nations share for the future. The pearls were chosen because they represent wisdom and integrity, qualities that you embody in your public service." Queen Camilla moved closer to get a better look at the bow, and Catherine could see that she was genuinely impressed by the artistry involved. "It's absolutely stunning," Camilla murmured. "The detail work is extraordinary." King Charles nodded in agreement, studying the bow with the appreciation of someone who understood fine craftsmanship. "This is indeed a remarkable piece of artistry, Mr. President. The symbolism is both meaningful and beautifully executed." As Catherine reached out to touch the bow gently, she was struck by how soft the silk felt beneath her fingers. This wasn't just a diplomatic gift. It was clearly something that had been planned and created with enormous care and attention to detail. The fact that American artisans had worked together to create something so beautiful specifically for her was both humbling and deeply moving. The afternoon light was perfect for the photographs that were being taken, and Catherine realized that this moment would likely be remembered and discussed for years to come. The combination of the beautiful setting, the meaningful gift, and the presence of the royal family created a scene that seemed almost too perfect to be real. President Trump held the bow delicately in his hands, and Catherine could see that he was genuinely moved by the moment. The usual bluster and showmanship that characterized many of his public appearances seemed to have given way to something more sincere and heartfelt. He looked directly at Catherine as he prepared to present the gift formally. "Princess Catherine," he began, his voice carrying across the quiet garden, "it would be my great honor if you would accept this bow as a symbol of the enduring friendship between the United States of America and the United Kingdom. More than that, I hope you'll accept it as a personal token of the respect and admiration that millions of Americans have for you and your service." Catherine stepped forward gracefully, extending her hands to receive the bow. As their hands briefly touched during the transfer, she was surprised by how warm and genuine Trump's smile appeared. Whatever his reputation in the political arena, in this moment he seemed genuinely committed to creating a positive diplomatic gesture. "Mr. President," Catherine replied, her voice clear and confident, "I am deeply honored to receive this beautiful gift. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, and the symbolism is both meaningful and moving. Please convey my sincere gratitude to the artisans who created this piece, and to the American people for their friendship and support. As Catherine held the bow up to examine it more closely in the afternoon light, the silk seemed to shimmer with an almost ethereal quality. The gold and silver threads caught the sunlight and created tiny sparkles throughout the fabric, while the pearls added an elegant luminosity that made the entire piece seem to glow. King Charles moved closer to get a better view of the bow, and Catherine could see the approval in his eyes. Throughout his decades of royal service, he had received and witnessed the presentation of countless diplomatic gifts, but there was something about this particular gesture that seemed to resonate with him on a deeper level. "Mr. President," the king said thoughtfully, "this is truly a magnificent piece of artistry. The care and attention that went into its creation is evident in every detail. I'm particularly struck by the way the American and British symbols have been woven together so seamlessly. It speaks to the shared values and common purpose that have bound our nations together through good times and challenging ones alike." Queen Camilla had been watching the entire ceremony with obvious delight, and Catherine noticed that she seemed particularly pleased by the way events were unfolding. As someone who had navigated the complexities of royal protocol for many years, Camilla understood better than most how rare it was for diplomatic ceremonies to feel so genuinely warm and meaningful. "The bow is absolutely exquisite," Camilla added, moving closer to admire the intricate details. "I can see why you wanted to present it in the garden. The natural light really brings out all the subtle colors and textures in the fabric." Trump beamed at the positive reception his gift was receiving. "We wanted to create something that would be worthy of Princess Catherine and her remarkable contributions to society. The designers spent months working on the pattern, and the artisans who crafted it are some of the finest in America. They were honored to be part of this project." Catherine found herself genuinely touched by the thought and effort that had gone into creating the bow. In her years as a royal, she had received many beautiful gifts, but few had come with such a detailed explanation of their symbolism and creation. The fact that American craftspeople had dedicated months of their time to creating something specifically for her was both humbling and inspiring. "Would it be appropriate for me to wear the bow today?" Catherine asked, looking toward King Charles for guidance on protocol. She was genuinely excited about the prospect of incorporating this beautiful piece into her outfit, but she wanted to ensure that doing so would be diplomatically appropriate. King Charles consulted briefly with Sir Edward, who had been standing discreetly nearby throughout the ceremony. After a whispered conversation, the king nodded his approval. "I think that would be a wonderful gesture, Catherine. It would certainly demonstrate our appreciation for the gift and the sentiment behind it." Catherine handed the bow to her lady-in-waiting, Sarah, who had appeared with a small hand mirror to assist with the styling. Working together, they carefully positioned the bow in Catherine's hair, securing it with the nearly invisible pins that Sarah always carried for such occasions. The midnight blue silk complemented Catherine's outfit perfectly, and the gold and silver threads added an elegant sparkle that caught the light beautifully. As Catherine turned to face the assembled group, there was a moment of appreciative silence. The bow looked as if it had been designed specifically for her, complementing her features and adding an air of sophisticated elegance to her appearance. President Trump's face broke into a wide smile of satisfaction, clearly pleased with how perfectly his gift suited its recipient. "Magnificent," murmured King Charles, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Absolutely magnificent." The American delegation began taking photographs in earnest, capturing the moment from multiple angles. Catherine posed graciously with President Trump, then with the entire royal family, and finally in several solo shots that would undoubtedly appear in newspapers and magazines around the world within hours. During a brief pause in the photography session, Catherine noticed that a small crowd of palace staff had gathered at a respectful distance to observe the ceremony. Word had clearly spread throughout the palace about the special presentation, and even the usually reserved household staff seemed genuinely excited about witnessing this historic moment. "This bow will hold a special place in my collection," Catherine told President Trump as they stood together near the fountain. "I can already envision several occasions where it would be perfect to wear. The Commonwealth service at Westminster Abbey next month would be particularly appropriate, given the symbolism of unity and friendship that the bow represents." Trump nodded enthusiastically. That would be wonderful, Princess Catherine. I know the American people would be thrilled to see their gift being worn at such an important event. It would really demonstrate the special relationship between our countries. As the formal ceremony began to wind down, Catherine found herself reflecting on how unexpectedly meaningful the afternoon had become. What had started as a mysterious diplomatic gesture had evolved into something much more personal and significant. The atmosphere in the garden had become increasingly relaxed as the formal ceremony concluded. President Trump seemed genuinely pleased with how the presentation had been received, and Catherine could see that he was enjoying the opportunity to engage in a more personal diplomatic exchange than the usual rigid state dinner protocols typically allowed. Princess Catherine, Trump said as they walked slowly through the rose garden, I hope you don't mind me saying that this bow suits you perfectly. When our designers were working on the concept, they studied many photographs of you at various royal events, trying to create something that would complement your style and grace. Catherine was touched by this revelation. The idea that American artisans had spent time studying her public appearances in order to create the perfect accessory demonstrated a level of thoughtfulness that went far beyond typical diplomatic gift-giving. That's incredibly thoughtful. Mr. President, I'm curious about the specific inspiration. For the design, the pattern of roses and stars is so beautifully integrated. The lead designer is actually a woman named Maria Rodriguez from New Mexico, Trump explained with obvious pride. She specializes in creating textiles that tell stories through their patterns. When we commissioned this piece, we asked her to create something that would represent the friendship between our nations, while also honoring your personal style and the charitable work you do. King Charles, who had been listening to this conversation while examining some of the palace's prized roses, turned back toward them with interest. I'd be very interested to learn more about Ms. Rodriguez and her work. The textile arts have always fascinated me, and this piece demonstrates truly exceptional skill. Trump's face lit up at the king's interest. She would be absolutely thrilled to know that your majesty appreciates her work. Maria comes from a long line of traditional weavers, but she's developed her own modern techniques for incorporating precious metals into silk. The gold and silver threads in Princess Catherine's bow were actually hand-spun using methods that her grandmother taught her. This information added yet another layer of meaning to the gift. Catherine found herself increasingly moved by the thought that the bow connected her not just to American craftsmanship, but to generations of artistic tradition passed down through families. It transformed the bow from a simple diplomatic present into something much more profound, a bridge between cultures and generations. Queen Camilla had been walking slightly ahead of the group, but she paused near a particularly beautiful climbing rose to rejoin the conversation. I think what strikes me most about this gift is how it manages to be both deeply traditional and thoroughly modern at the same time. The craftsmanship techniques are clearly rooted in history, but the design itself feels very contemporary. That's exactly what we were hoping to achieve, Trump replied. We wanted to create something that would honor the long friendship between our countries, while also looking toward the future. The bow represents continuity and change, tradition and innovation, all the things that make the relationship between Britain and America so special. As they continued their informal tour of the garden, Catherine noticed that the American security detail was maintaining their professional vigilance, while also seeming to enjoy the relaxed atmosphere. Several of them were clearly taking personal photographs with their phones, probably to share with family members back home, who would never believe they had witnessed such an intimate royal ceremony. The conversation gradually shifted to broader topics of mutual interest. King Charles and President Trump discussed environmental conservation efforts, a subject close to the king's heart, while Catherine and Queen Camilla talked with the president about various charitable initiatives that might benefit from increased cooperation between British and American organizations. I've always been impressed by the scope of your charitable work. Princess Catherine, Trump said as they paused near the fountain where the ceremony had taken place. The early childhood development programs you've championed have received significant attention in America, and many of our educators are interested in learning from your approaches. Catherine was pleased to hear this, as expanding the international reach of her charitable work had been one of her long-term goals. I would be delighted to explore opportunities for collaboration. Child development is such a universal concern, and I believe we can learn enormously from each other's experiences and innovations. Perhaps, King Charles suggested diplomatically, this beautiful bow could become a symbol not just of friendship between our nations, but of ongoing collaboration in areas of mutual concern. Catherine's work with children, our shared environmental challenges, cultural exchanges. There are so many areas where Britain and America can work together effectively. Trump nodded enthusiastically. That's a wonderful way to think about it, Your Majesty. The bow could represent the beginning of a new chapter in our cooperation, rather than just a single ceremonial moment. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself increasingly comfortable with the president and his delegation. While she had approached the ceremony with some uncertainty about what to expect, the genuine warmth and thoughtfulness of the gesture had created an atmosphere of authentic friendship rather than mere diplomatic politeness. The palace photographers had been working throughout the afternoon, capturing both formal poses and candid moments of conversation. Catherine knew that these images would be carefully reviewed by the palace press office before being released to the media, but she felt confident that they accurately represented the positive spirit of the occasion. "Mr. President," Catherine said as they prepared to conclude the garden portion of the afternoon, "I want you to know that this bow will always remind me not just of the friendship between our countries, but of the personal kindness you've shown today. The thoughtfulness behind this gift is truly extraordinary." Trump seemed genuinely moved by her words. "Princess Catherine, it has been an absolute honor to present this gift to you. Seeing you wear it today and knowing that it will be part of your collection for years to come makes all the planning and preparation worthwhile." As they began walking back toward the palace, Catherine caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the garden's ornamental mirrors. The bow looked so natural in her hair that it was hard to believe she had only been wearing it for a few hours. The midnight blue silk seemed to bring out the color of her eyes, while the gold and silver threads added a subtle glamour that elevated her entire appearance. Queen Camilla fell into step beside her as they approached the palace entrance. "You know, my dear," she said quietly, "I think this afternoon may be remembered as one of the most successful diplomatic ceremonies we've hosted in quite some time. The genuine emotion and thoughtfulness on display today has been really quite remarkable." The following morning brought an unexpected flurry of international attention that none of them had fully anticipated. Catherine awoke to find her private secretary waiting with a stack of newspapers from around the world, all featuring photographs from the previous day's ceremony prominently on their front pages. The image of her receiving the bow from President Trump had clearly captured the imagination of media outlets everywhere. "The response has been overwhelmingly positive," Sarah reported as she laid out the various publications on Catherine's breakfast table. "The Times calls it a masterpiece of diplomatic artistry, while the Washington Post describes it as a bridge-building moment that transcends politics. Even the fashion magazines are calling the bow itself a work of art." Catherine studied the photographs with fascination. The palace photographers had done exceptional work, capturing not just the formal moments of the presentation, but also the genuine emotions on everyone's faces. In one particularly striking image, she could see the exact moment when she first saw the bow, her expression showing a mixture of surprise and delight that felt completely authentic. The international coverage was equally impressive. French newspapers were praising the elegance of the ceremony. Italian publications were focusing on the craftsmanship of the bow itself, and German media outlets were highlighting the symbolic importance of the gesture for transatlantic relations. It seemed that the simple act of presenting and receiving a beautiful accessory had somehow touched a nerve in the global consciousness. "His Majesty has asked to see you when convenient this morning," Sarah continued. "I believe he wants to discuss some follow-up opportunities that have arisen from yesterday's success." Catherine finished her breakfast while reviewing the morning briefings, then made her way to King Charles's private study. She found him in an unusually cheerful mood, sitting behind his antique desk with his own collection of international newspapers spread before him. "Catherine, my dear," he said warmly as she entered, "I don't think any of us could have predicted the response this ceremony would generate. The palace switchboard has been overwhelmed with calls from journalists, diplomatic missions, and cultural organizations from around the world." Catherine settled into the comfortable chair across from his desk, still wearing the bow from the previous day. She had discovered that morning that it was remarkably versatile. working beautifully with her casual morning attire as well as it had with her formal afternoon ensemble. "I've been amazed by the international reaction," Catherine replied. "It seems that people everywhere are hungry for positive diplomatic gestures and symbols of friendship between nations." King Charles nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. The American Embassy has already reached out with several interesting proposals for follow-up activities. Apparently, the success of yesterday's ceremony has opened doors for cultural and educational exchanges that might not have been possible otherwise." He reached for a folder on his desk and extracted several official-looking documents. "The Smithsonian Institution has proposed a special exhibition featuring American textile arts, with your bow as the centerpiece. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York has suggested a similar exhibition focusing on the intersection of diplomacy and decorative arts throughout history." Catherine felt a thrill of excitement at these possibilities. The idea that her bow could serve as inspiration for educational exhibitions that would reach thousands of people was far beyond anything she had imagined when she first received the gift. "There's more," King Charles continued with obvious satisfaction. "Harvard University has proposed establishing a new scholarship program for British students studying international relations, to be called the Diplomatic Arts Fellowship. They want to use yesterday's ceremony as an example of how cultural gestures can advance diplomatic objectives." The morning continued with a series of meetings and phone calls as the palace staff worked to respond to the overwhelming interest in the bow ceremony. Catherine found herself speaking with museum curators, university professors, and cultural attachés from embassies around the world, all eager to explore ways to build upon the success of the previous day's event. One particularly intriguing conversation was with Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the director of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. "Princess Catherine," Dr. Hartwell explained over the phone, "we've been following the international response to your bow ceremony with great interest. We believe this could be the perfect opportunity to launch a major exhibition on the role of decorative arts and diplomacy throughout British history." The idea was fascinating. Catherine learned that the V&A had been planning an exhibition on diplomatic gifts for several years, but had struggled to find the right centerpiece that would capture public attention. The bow from President Trump, combined with the story of its creation and presentation, could provide exactly the contemporary relevance the exhibition needed. "We could feature diplomatic gifts received by the royal family over the centuries," Dr. Hartwell continued enthusiastically. "From medieval tapestries to modern sculptures, your bow would represent the continuation of this tradition into the 21st century, showing how the exchange of beautiful objects continues to play a role in international relations." Catherine was genuinely excited by this proposal. The opportunity to contextualize her bow within the broader history of diplomatic gift-giving would help people understand the deeper significance of what had happened in the palace garden. It would transform a single moment into part of a much larger story about how nations build relationships through shared appreciation of beauty and craftsmanship. Queen Camilla joined Catherine for lunch, and their conversation naturally turned to the morning's developments. "I have to admit," Camilla said with her characteristic directness, "I initially thought yesterday's ceremony might be little more than a pleasant photo opportunity. I never imagined it would generate this kind of sustained international interest. I think people are genuinely hungry for positive diplomatic news," Catherine replied thoughtfully. "So much of international relations coverage focuses on conflicts and disagreements. Yesterday's ceremony showed that nations can still find ways to honor each other through beauty and artistry." The afternoon brought even more unexpected developments. The American artisan who had created the bow, Maria Rodriguez, had been contacted by multiple news outlets and was being hailed as a cultural ambassador. Her workshop in New Mexico had received dozens of inquiries from potential customers interested in commissioning similar pieces. "It's wonderful to see an individual artist receiving recognition for her work," Catherine commented to her private secretary. "Too often, the craftspeople behind diplomatic gifts remain anonymous, but Ms. Rodriguez's story is becoming part of the larger narrative." The story was indeed taking on a life of its own. Social media was filled with images of the bow ceremony, and hashtags like #diplomatic art and Catherine Bow were trending internationally. Fashion bloggers were analyzing the bow's design elements, while political commentators were discussing its symbolic significance for transatlantic relations. Perhaps most surprisingly, the ceremony had inspired other world leaders to consider similar gestures. The French president's office had quietly inquired about the protocols for presenting decorative gifts to members of the royal family, while the Canadian Prime Minister had announced plans to commission a piece of indigenous art as a future diplomatic gift. As the day concluded, Catherine reflected on how a single moment of diplomatic grace had somehow touched something deeper in the global consciousness. The bow itself was beautiful, certainly, but its real power seemed to lie in what it represented: the possibility that nations could still find ways to honor each other through gestures of genuine respect and admiration. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Catherine found herself preparing for what would become the bow's first major public appearance at the Commonwealth service at Westminster Abbey. The choice to wear the American-made bow to this particularly British occasion had been carefully considered, and she was confident that it would send exactly the right message about international friendship and cooperation. The morning of the service brought crisp autumn weather and bright sunshine that seemed to promise a perfect day for one of the royal family's most important annual events. Catherine had chosen a deep burgundy coat that would complement the midnight blue of the bow beautifully, while the gold and silver threads would catch the light streaming through the Abbey's ancient windows. As her dresser carefully positioned the bow in her hair, Catherine thought about all the extraordinary developments that had followed that afternoon in the palace garden. The proposed museum exhibitions were moving forward rapidly, with the Smithsonian and the V&A already beginning to plan their collaborative efforts. The Harvard Scholarship Program had received its initial funding, and applications were expected to open within the year. "Your Royal Highness," her lady-in-waiting announced, "Their Majesties are ready to depart for Westminster Abbey." Catherine took one final look in the mirror, satisfied that the bow looked perfect with her carefully chosen outfit. The pearls seemed to glow against her dark hair, while the silk had developed an almost luminous quality that made it appear to shimmer with inner light. The drive to Westminster Abbey provided an opportunity to review the service program with King Charles and Queen Camilla. This year's Commonwealth service was particularly significant, as it would include representatives from all 54 Commonwealth nations, many of whom had specifically requested meetings with Catherine to discuss the diplomatic arts, initiatives that had grown out of the bow ceremony. "I understand the High Commissioner from Canada is particularly interested in commissioning a piece from Indigenous artists," King Charles mentioned as their car approached the Abbey. "Apparently, they've been inspired by the success of President Trump's gift to explore similar cultural diplomacy opportunities." Queen Camilla smiled knowingly. "The ripple effects from that afternoon in our garden continue to amaze me. Who would have thought that a single bow could inspire so much international cooperation and cultural exchange?" As they arrived at Westminster Abbey, Catherine could see that the media presence was even larger than usual. Photographers were positioned strategically to capture images of the royal family's arrival, and she knew that her decision to wear the American bow would be noted and discussed extensively in the coming days. The service itself was magnificent, with representatives from around the Commonwealth gathering to celebrate their shared values and common purposes. During the ceremony, Catherine noticed several of the High Commissioners and other dignitaries glancing at her bow with obvious interest and appreciation. Word of its significance had clearly spread through diplomatic circles. Following the service, Catherine participated in the traditional reception, where she had the opportunity to speak personally with many of the Commonwealth representatives. The conversations were remarkably warm and engaging, with many delegates expressing their admiration for the way the bow ceremony had captured international attention and inspired new forms of cultural diplomacy. "Princess Catherine," said the High Commissioner from New Zealand, "I wanted to personally thank you for wearing that beautiful bow today. It sends such a powerful message about the importance of cultural exchange and international friendship. We're planning to propose a similar initiative featuring Maori artistic traditions." Similar conversations took place throughout the afternoon, with delegates from Australia, South Africa, India, and numerous other Commonwealth nations all expressing interest in developing their own diplomatic arts programs. Catherine realized that the bow had become something much more significant than a beautiful accessory. It had become a symbol of a new approach to international relations, based on mutual respect and cultural appreciation. The most moving conversation of the day came from a young diplomat from Jamaica who approached Catherine near the end of the reception. "Your Royal Highness," she said with obvious emotion, "seeing you wear that bow today made me realize that diplomacy doesn't always have to be about formal treaties and political negotiations. Sometimes the most powerful diplomatic gestures are the ones that speak to our shared humanity and appreciation for beauty." This observation stayed with Catherine throughout the rest of the afternoon. The young diplomat had articulated something that Catherine herself had been feeling, but hadn't quite put into words. The bow ceremony had succeeded not because it solved any major political problems, but because it reminded people that nations are made up of individuals who can still find ways to honor and respect each other. The evening brought news that the day's events had generated even more international attention than the original ceremony. Images of Catherine wearing the bow at Westminster Abbey were appearing on news websites around the world, accompanied by stories about the growing diplomatic arts movement that had emerged from President Trump's gift. Maria Rodriguez, the artisan who had created the bow, was featured in a major television interview that evening, discussing her inspiration for the design and her hopes for how it might continue to serve as a bridge between cultures. "When I was working on Princess Catherine's bow," she explained to the interviewer, "I never imagined it would become a symbol of international cooperation. I just wanted to create something beautiful that would honor the friendship between our countries." The interview revealed additional details about the bow's creation that Catherine found fascinating. Rodriguez had incorporated silk from worms fed on leaves from a tree that had been planted in Virginia by Thomas Jefferson, connecting the bow to the earliest days of American independence. The gold thread contained traces of metal from California's gold rush era, while the silver came from mines in Colorado that had been worked by immigrant families from around the world. These historical connections added even more layers of meaning to the bow, transforming it from a contemporary diplomatic gift into a piece that literally contained threads of American history. Catherine felt honored to be the custodian of something so rich in symbolism and historical significance. The day concluded with a private dinner at Buckingham Palace, where Catherine, King Charles, and Queen Camilla reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a mysterious wooden box in the rose garden just 3 weeks earlier. "I think," said King Charles thoughtfully, as they sat in the comfortable drawing room after dinner, "that this bow may prove to be one of the most significant diplomatic gifts of our time. Not because of its monetary value, but because of its ability to inspire people around the world to think differently about how nations can relate to each other." Catherine nodded in agreement, unconsciously reaching up to touch the bow that she was still wearing. It had become so much a part of her that she sometimes forgot she was wearing it, yet she was constantly aware of its significance and the responsibility that came with being its bearer. "The real test," Queen Camilla observed, "will be whether the enthusiasm and goodwill generated by this ceremony can be translated into lasting positive changes in international relations. But I have to say the early signs are remarkably encouraging." 6 months had passed since that transformative afternoon in the palace gardens, and Catherine was preparing for what had become known as the International Diplomatic Arts Symposium at the Victoria and Albert Museum. The event, inspired directly by the bow ceremony, had attracted participants from over 40 countries, all eager to explore how cultural exchanges could enhance traditional diplomacy. The bow itself had taken on a life of its own during these months. It had been featured in the V&A's acclaimed exhibition, Threads of Diplomacy, 5 Centuries of International Gift-Giving, which had broken attendance records and inspired similar exhibitions in museums around the world. The Smithsonian's companion exhibition in Washington had drawn over 500,000 visitors, while traveling versions were being planned for museums in Paris, Tokyo, and Sydney. Catherine stood before her mirror on the morning of the symposium, considering whether to wear the bow for this special occasion. It had become something of a signature piece for her, appearing at carefully chosen events where its symbolism would be most meaningful. Today felt like the perfect occasion to wear it again, as she would be speaking to an international audience about the power of cultural diplomacy. As her dresser carefully positioned the bow, Catherine reflected on all the extraordinary changes that had flowed from that single moment of presidential generosity. The Harvard Scholarship Program was now accepting its first class of fellows, while similar programs had been established at Oxford, Cambridge, and the Sorbonne. Maria Rodriguez had become an international celebrity in the world of textile arts, receiving commissions from heads of state and cultural institutions around the globe. "Your Royal Highness," her private secretary announced, "the car is ready to take you to the V&A. I should mention that President Trump has sent a personal message wishing you well with today's symposium." Catherine was touched by this gesture. Despite the sometimes turbulent nature of international politics, the personal connection forged during the bow ceremony had endured and even strengthened over time. The president had become a genuine advocate for the diplomatic arts movement, hosting similar ceremonies at the White House and encouraging other world leaders to explore cultural diplomacy initiatives. The drive to the V&A gave Catherine time to review her speech notes one final time. She would be addressing an audience that included ambassadors, museum directors, artists, and cultural policy experts from around the world. Her theme was the unexpected, power of beauty in international relations, and she planned to use the story of her bow as a case study in how seemingly simple gestures could create profound and lasting change. Upon arriving at the museum, Catherine was greeted by Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, whose vision had helped transform the bow's story into a major cultural phenomenon. "Princess Catherine," Dr. Hartwell said with obvious excitement, "I can't thank you enough for agreeing to speak today. The international response to this symposium has exceeded our wildest expectations." The main auditorium was filled to capacity, with additional attendees participating via live video links from museums and universities around the world. Catherine could see familiar faces from the diplomatic community, as well as artists, scholars, and cultural leaders she had met during the various events that had grown out of the bow ceremony. As she approached the podium, Catherine felt the weight of the bow in her hair and the significance of the moment. 6 months ago, she had been a somewhat reluctant participant in a mysterious diplomatic ceremony. Today, she was speaking as an advocate for a new form of international engagement that had captured imaginations around the world. 6 months ago, Catherine began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "I received what I thought would be a simple diplomatic gift in the gardens of Buckingham Palace. I could never have imagined that this beautiful bow would become the catalyst for a global conversation about the role of culture and artistry in international relations." She went on to describe the ceremony itself, the immediate international reaction, and the remarkable cascade of cultural and educational initiatives that had followed. But more importantly, she spoke about what the experience had taught her about the human connections that underlie all successful diplomacy. "What strikes me most about this entire experience," Catherine continued, "is how a gesture rooted in beauty and craftsmanship was able to transcend political differences and speak to something fundamental in human nature." People everywhere responded to this story because it reminded them that nations are not abstract entities, but communities of individuals who share common values and aspirations. The audience was clearly engaged, with many taking notes and several participants nodding, in recognition of their own experiences with cultural diplomacy. Catherine could see that her message was resonating not just with the diplomats and officials present, but with the artists and cultural leaders who would ultimately be responsible for creating future initiatives. During the question and answer session that followed, Catherine was struck by the thoughtfulness and passion of the queries. A museum director from Ghana asked about establishing artist exchange programs between Commonwealth nations. A textile artist from Peru inquired about creating collaborative pieces that would represent multiple countries. A diplomat from South Korea proposed using traditional crafts as tools for building understanding between nations with difficult political relationships. Each question reinforced Catherine's growing conviction that the bow ceremony had tapped into something much larger than anyone had initially realized. There was clearly a widespread hunger for new approaches to international relations that emphasized shared humanity rather than political differences. The symposium continued throughout the day, with workshops and panel discussions exploring various aspects of cultural diplomacy. Catherine participated in several sessions, sharing her experiences and learning from the remarkable array of experts and practitioners who had gathered from around the world. One particularly moving moment came during a panel on artist healing in post-conflict societies, where Catherine met a young artist from Bosnia who had been using traditional crafts to help rebuild relationships between former enemies. Your bow story gave me hope, the artist told Catherine during a break. It showed me that beauty really can overcome division and hatred. As the day concluded, Catherine participated in the closing ceremony, where participants from each country presented small gifts representing their cultural traditions to a collective diplomatic arts archive that would be housed permanently at the V&A. The ceremony was clearly inspired by the original bow presentation, but each gift reflected the unique artistic heritage of its donor nation. The final moment of the symposium came when Catherine was asked to place her bow temporarily in the archive as the centerpiece of the collection. As she carefully positioned it among the other gifts, she was struck by how perfectly it fit with the diverse array of artistic treasures from around the world. The American bow looked completely at home, surrounded by Aboriginal art from Australia, traditional textiles from India, carved sculptures from Nigeria, and ceramics from Japan. This bow, Catherine said in her closing remarks, began as a symbol of friendship between two nations. Today it becomes part of a larger symbol, a collection that represents the possibility of a world where cultural appreciation and artistic beauty serve as bridges between all peoples. As she left the V&A that evening, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. A simple bow had become a catalyst for international cooperation, educational innovation, and cultural exchange on a scale that would have seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. The bow itself remained beautiful and meaningful to her personally, but its real significance lay in what it had inspired others to create. Around the world, artists and diplomats, museum curators and heads of state were finding new ways to use beauty and craftsmanship as tools for building understanding and friendship between nations. As Catherine's car pulled away from the museum, she touched the bow one more time, grateful for the unexpected journey it had taken her on and excited about all the possibilities that still lay ahead. The story that had begun in a palace garden had become something much larger, a new chapter in the long history of human efforts to find common ground through shared appreciation of beauty and artistry.